Dan, let's start with, well, something of a diplomatic victory, surely, for President Biden, the prisoner swap, which I've seen described as a vibe shift for Washington and for US politics, with the return of, well, several prisoners, actually, to the US. How would you analyse that in the context of Biden's presidency?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, as you said, it is joyful news, rare joyful news for the families, of course, but also for America, for the entire free world as well. Uh, I see it as a triumph of diplomacy, a triumph for the kind of leadership that is typified by Joe Biden and by Kamala Harris. It was striking based on the reporting that on the same day that Joe Biden announced his decision to withdraw from the presidential race, that very morning he was apparently negotiating this deal to free, I think, 16 people who'd been held unjustly for years. Negotiating with Slovenia, Germany, Poland, a half dozen countries. Vice President Harris played a role in this, engaging with Chancellor Scholz of Germany at the Munich Security Conference. So, I think in the context of his presidency and her candidacy, it's a prime example of the type of leadership, the type of complex work, the unseen work, sometimes unheralded or unappreciated work that they both do so well, and that gets results. And you can contrast that, with Donald Trump, who's the totality of his contribution to the effort was to claim that only he could bring these prisoners home, which, by the way, some of these hostages were being held when he was president. He didn't lift a finger. So, now Joe Biden, Kamala Harris got it done, and all he's doing is moaning about it.
In terms of the long-lasting impact of this, I note that the president and the vice president have been meeting the prisoners as they've arrived at Joint Base Andrews, well, not far from Washington D.C. Overnight/this morning. Is this something that Harris can and should campaign on going forward from here?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think there's one question about whether to explicitly campaign on a victory like this. Of course, Vice President Harris is owns the record of the Biden-Harris administration. To me, this event, it's a celebratory event for the country. It's not a political event. And, I think the impact that it has on the race is reinforcing the stakes of presidential leadership, which does accrue to her favor. It's reminding people that these sorts of affairs are not a game. They require serious, committed leadership. They require global diplomacy and not sort of American isolationism, which is being promised on the other side. I think it's an important issue in life, but it is a quieter issue, at least on the forefront of the campaign, would be my best guess.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I take your point there on the isolationism. How do you engage if that is your direction of travel? I suppose in these sorts of global circumstances, this has involved so many countries, as you've been mentioning already, Dan.
That's exactly right. You have to imagine, if Donald Trump is sitting in that office, is the result the same? I think the answer is clearly no, based on what we know of what went into these negotiations, the relationships required, the leader to leader relationships required, in particular in this case, again based on the reporting. It's hard to imagine the style, the priorities, the values of Donald Trump returning a similar result.
Elsewhere in the Harris campaign, there seems to be lots of buzz this weekend about who Kamala Harris may choose as her vice presidential candidate/nominee in the next few days. And I don't know about you, Dan, I've seen lots in the last sort of 12 hours or so about who's got events happening this week and who doesn't. That seems to be the thing that we're all reading into. So Pete Buttigieg is the latest to seemingly cancel some campaigning events over the course of the weekend, and everyone wonders, does this mean he's being sort of recalled to be set up as the vice presidential candidate? What do you think? Is it going to be Pete?
I don't have the answer to that. I too have canceled my weekend plans. That's as much as I'll say about that. I think I've read that same story about just about everybody who's under serious consideration. People are tracking airplanes, they're tracking schedules. I wouldn't read a lot into it. I think the bench of contenders One of them will be selected as the the vice presidential nominee. The rest of them will be active on the campaign trail. This is a team effort. It's a feature of certainly the Democratic Party. I can't speak to the Republican Party. That this is a unified team effort. This is not necessarily about one person or one ticket. It's about a united party getting the message out about their vision for the country.
In terms of that vision, should a running mate broaden or consolidate the appeal of the presidential candidate? What is their role?
That's the perennial question. I think the more popular answer is the former. It's a chance to broaden. I'm speaking now in broad terms and not about this race in particular, but typically the vice presidential selection is an opportunity to sort of fill out the entirety of the coin, complement the qualities, the experiences, the background, even the sort of geographic background of the top of the ticket with someone who's going to, yes, appeal to the base of the party, but also expand the coalition. You see that time and again. And I suspect in certain respects, you'll see that again here. The alternative path, of course, is the Donald Trump path, to, at least this time around, to find sort of the closest approximation of Donald Trump, or the one with the most fealty to Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, Senator Vance, as we're seeing now in the public rollout, not being someone liable to expand the voter base for the Republican ticket.
Yeah. Do you think J.D. Vance will last, incidentally? Do you think he is going to make it all the way?
You're asking me to read the mind of Donald Trump, and it's too quick of a read.
Just a final point then on the campaigning of the last couple of days
Sure.
and how this is kind of shaping up. Donald Trump has faced criticism for his comments on Kamala Harris's race and her background, her upbringing. There is also kind of something emerging in the Times this morning, reporting the gender divide widening in the days since Kamala Harris launched her campaign. So there's an interesting thing here. She leads by 11 points among women, but that widening, she's doing better than Biden among women, but she's doing worse among men. And I find that quite a fascinating sort of nuance within the polling that seems to be pointing certainly to a Harris bounce, but is it happening in a broad enough way to actually carry her to the White House?
It's a fair question. I think it's important to remember it's still quite early. It feels like this election has been going on for the last 11 or 12 years, but it is quite early in the process, particularly for Kamala Harris, who has been a candidate, I've lost count, not very many days now. There are going to be dozens of news cycles, world events, decisions that will shape the race and shape impressions. And, vice presidents typically are not terribly well known in America until they need to be. And, in her case, I think you're seeing a candidate with a great opportunity to even though she's been vice president for 3.5 years, to introduce herself to people, talk about her career fighting for working families, talk about her values. I think the polls will do a lot of shifting between now in November. There will be ebbs, there will be flows. But yeah, the gender gap is certainly revealing. I don't know that it's terribly surprising, but I'm certain it is not fixed. That's the one thing I can say with confidence.